And I have to applaud her. Not only did she give me an evaluation, an introduction that is printed out, she actually put it she broke it out. Analia. Very good. Our next speaker would like to take a break from discussing topics she doesn't like to speak, instead on a topic that she doesn't understand. Delivering her second speech from the Presentation Mastery Pathway, please welcome Toastmaster Analia Perez as she presents her speech titled Cultural Identity, a Journey to a Lack of Understanding. Help me welcome Analia. Toastmasters.
I read an article recently in the New York Times about an indigenous tribe living in the rainforest of Brazil named the Pirapicura. And they're a tribe that a little less than a century ago had a population of about 100. But since then, their numbers have dwindled to just two men. The first named Temandua, who anthropologists believe is approximately 50 years old. And the second named Paki, who anthropologists believe is Temandua's uncle, of indeterminate age. And the primary purpose of the article was to grapple with the question of who holds ownership over the rainforest that these two men inhabit. Is it the ranchers and loggers who hold government titles to the land, or is it these two indigenous men whose ancestors were there long before Brazil had a government? And central to this discussion is Temandua, the younger of these two men, who actually recently went missing, purposefully. Now, the reason why he in particular is so important is because both government officials and anthropologists believe that he is the last hope for the continuation of the Pirapicura. That, in essence, the government is trying to find him in the hopes that when they do, they can convince him to start procreating. Now, I found this article compelling for a number of reasons, but the primary of which is that it reminded me of something, a memory that I haven't thought of in a while, which is that when I was younger and I first learned the definition of the word purebred, I used to tell everyone that I was purebred. Now, I realize how problematic that sounds, but at the time there wasn't anything elitist about it. I was just simply proud of the fact, and still am, that my parents are both Guatemalan and that their parents are Guatemalan, and that their parents' parents are also Guatemalan. And they're not just any Guatemalan, mind you. They're actually Quiche, an indigenous group of people that primarily resides in the highlands of Guatemala. And I remember as a child being so proud of this, of being 100% Guatemalan, that I convinced myself that in order to preserve my culture, that I too needed to marry somebody who was also Guatemalan, so that I could have Guatemalan children. And when I think about this now, I think the first thing I think is, wow, I really did not understand genetics. But the second thing I think is that I clearly have no follow through, because if my current relationship is anything to go by, then I will 100% marry a white man. But then the last thing I think is how, oh no, I lost it. Oh, okay, there we go. Is how ironic it is that I spent so much time thinking about this idea that I needed to preserve my cultural identity, because in actuality, I know nothing about being Guatemalan. And I think about it now, and when I was younger, we didn't necessarily do anything that would normally be considered Guatemalan. We actually didn't do anything that would be considered American either. When I celebrated holidays, we usually ate kind of rice and beans, and that wasn't from any kind of cultural perspective. It was simply because of the fact that that's what we like to eat. And I wrote this last night, so hold on one second. And for a long time, this really bothered me, because while I didn't feel like I had missed out on anything, other people made me feel like I did. Like, I wasn't Guatemalan enough because I didn't participate in any Guatemalan traditions, or Latino enough because my Spanish isn't really that great, or even American enough because, yeah, we almost ate rice and beans for every holiday. But recently I had an epiphany, and I had this epiphany during a thought experiment, which I often perform when I'm having an existential crisis, which I do very often. And I thought about having children and what I would tell my children about Guatemala and what it means to be Guatemalan and just Latino in general. And I thought about how I would tell them about putting mayonnaise on my corn in kindergarten and how disgusting everybody thought that was, but how they're wrong because mayonnaise on corn is delicious and far superior to butter on corn. I thought about how I would tell them that I got into an argument in AP Italian about how to pronounce the word Colgate, which up until then I could have sworn was pronounced Colgate, even by Americans. And I thought about how I would tell them about learning most of my Spanish from watching telenovelas at my babysitter's house, because that was the only thing we were allowed to watch after we took our nap. I thought about how I would tell them about my visit to Guatemalan high school, about the time my sister and I tried to wrestle my grandmother 2-1, and how she ended up winning and we lost because she's really strong. And I thought about how I would tell them about the first time I wore a corte, which is a traditional Guatemalan skirt, and how my uncle told me that it made me look kind of fat and that I should probably stick with American clothes. I thought about how I would tell them how loud my siblings and I screamed the first time we saw my grandma kill a chicken with her bare hands. And I thought about all the time that I would spend telling them about how much time I agonized over the fact that I know so little about Guatemala, and that if they're anything like me, they are going to as well. But finally, I thought about how I would tell them that how they decide to interact with their culture is entirely up to them, and that nothing they do will ever make them any less Guatemalan. Thank you.